This episode of the Design Your Dream Home podcast is brought to you by Porcelanosa. With 30 showrooms in the United States and Canada, Porcelanosa is a luxury lifestyle brand that'll make your next project's dream into a reality. From a wide selection of tiles and mosaics to modern bathroom and kitchen cabinetry designs, Porcelanosa makes it easy to bring modern European design elements into your home. Visit porcelanosa-usa.com to learn more. You are listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. Doug and Steve are architects, and they're here to help you design your dream home.
I'm really excited today to have Jerryn McCray as our guest on the Design Your Dream Home podcast. I know Jerryn from Twitter, actually, and just been talking to him now on the phone for the first time, but I really enjoy his the interactions on Twitter. Jerryn McCray received his Bachelor of Architecture degree from Auburn University in 2002. He now practices independently under the firm name of Jerryn McCray Architect in Baltimore and has designed extensively in that area as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands. Jerryn has evolved to become the go-to resource for homeowners looking to renovate urban row homes in Baltimore and D.C. To date, he has completed over 150 row house renovation designs, which include additions and expansions and include many historic properties. 150, that's an amazing number. That's an amazing number. Jerryn has also served as an adjunct professor and visiting architectural design critic at Morgan State University. And I know that he is still involved with Auburn as, on their board. So welcome, Jerryn McCray. I'm excited to have you on today.
Thank you.
Hey, Jerryn, great to have you, man.
Appreciate it.
So Jerryn, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your practice.
The practice is pretty simple. I go out of my way to simplify everything that I do. I had started off working for larger firms in town, designing mostly institutional buildings, schools, museums. Those are my two sort of specialties, if you will. So I learned through practice that some of the methods and practices were sort of overdone for the general populace in Baltimore City and the surrounding counties. So due to my network and due to my general interest beyond architecture, I started to sort of step away from the larger firm model and intentionally stumbled into an entire new marketplace. People who have never met an architect, people who have never really had an intimate conversation with an architect. And I've sort of become a shoulder to lean on for a lot of people who really don't understand the lingo, and they sort of tend to get nervous when they will call a larger firm and have to go through the receptionist and then through a project manager, all to get sort of so what do you want type of response. So the balance of my firm it's sort of a 50-50 split, give or take. It's half residential and half commercial stuff, and we're really going to talk about the residential sector today. I do simple row homes for modest income families, and I design overly, provision homes for people with too much money and too much imagination. I do it all, and I enjoy all of it. And I try to maintain a balance between all the various sectors that I have access to, some of which I don't. Some sectors I don't have access to, like I don't do hospitality design, for example. I don't design hospitals. I would never design a school by myself. So I try to stick to a 20,000 square foot under model because I can handle it, not necessarily myself, but with a small team.
Yeah, I saw that you on your Twitter, you because you're in Baltimore, and it's kind of like Boston, it's cold and miserable, and Doug's in Pennsylvania, we're all cold. And so that whenever you go down to the U.S. Virgin Islands, you're always celebrating like that you have, I guess, projects down there. Talk about how that's come about and what are you doing down there?
Sure. So my mother moved to St. Thomas in 1996. I was a freshman at Tuskegee University. I started my college career at Tuskegee and transferred to Auburn mainly because I was inspired by Sam Mockbee. And this is back before the internet. I'm sure you guys are aware. You could just drive to a school and talk to someone and somehow end up filling out a paper application and you're in.
Yeah.
So in the midst of me making that transition, my mother moved to St. Thomas, and one of the first things I noticed about St. Thomas is that there were only like 5 firms that were credible. So I, in my mind, knew that I could always be the 6th. There just wasn't a doubt in my mind. And in becoming the 6th firm, ultimately, fast forward 10 years and licensure and all that, I had no problems competing in a small marketplace, but with a large like collective budget. There's a lot of money in St. Thomas, right? And a lot of demand, but there's just there's not many people are licensed to practice there. Huh. That's sort of how it started. And started off designing these super houses for the mega rich, and that became frustrating very quickly. Then I discovered the same thing that I discovered in Baltimore, is that there are plenty of people who do not know what an architect does, who need our help. And so I started going for what I call my base hits, right? So if you're talking baseball, you have home runs and base hits. I can do 10 jobs a year for $5,000 to $10,000 and be okay, as opposed to spending 15 months working for some rich guy for 150 grand. I'd rather go for the base hits in some cases, or a combination of two.
That's interesting analogy. I'm sorry, Doug. I just one last question.
It really is. Go ahead.
So do you gain more satisfaction out of helping more people rather than the one-off super rich guy where you can do whatever you want? A lot of people, like the architects, that's what they want to do. They kind of want to just fulfill their fantasies and do whatever. And it sounds like to me that you seem to gain a lot of satisfaction by helping people that maybe need it more than someone who just has a lot of resources, I guess.
I think I'd gain more satisfaction by helping people who need the help, whether that's in architecture or just in life. I'm not a humanitarian by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not always a nice person, but I do what I can when I can with what I have, right? So I think it all goes back to my experience with Sam Akby at Auburn, personally, what I learned and gained from him as an architect and as an individual. It goes back to some family stuff. My grandmother is a humanitarian. She's adopted 75 plus kids, and so I've always been around lots of different types of people. And because of that, I can't abandon those who need my help. So if I get a phone call and I hear the desperation in some lady's voice, she wants to open a daycare in Baltimore City. She's using all the wrong terminology, but I can tell she has the resources and the money. In my mind, I'm like, how do I help this lady? I'm not going to run her away, because if I run her away, she's going to call one of the guys I used to work for, and they're just going to piss her off. And then she's going to be high and dry, right? So yeah, I definitely get more satisfaction out of the base hit jobs, but not to say that I don't have aspirations for the big jobs that are going to gain notoriety. I do have those aspirations, but I think I've learned to exercise some patience and realize that at 41 years old, no one really expects me to be Frank Lloyd Wright or Frank Gehry, for that matter. I probably have another 20 years to mature and get to that level, so I don't really obsess over it right now.
Jerryn, how many or how do your clients typically find you? Do they find you through the web, or is it word of mouth?
It's a combination. It's a lot of word of mouth at this point, because I've been practicing for 10 years solid in Baltimore. So it's at the point now where the home that I renovated 10 years ago for a single guy or gal, they've gotten married and they moved to a surrounding county. They're actually hiring me a second time, for a bigger home. And then I've even been hired again for the first home. It's getting to that point. The cold calls come from particularly Google searches, I think. And I usually ask people how they find me. I suspect that people go online and they type in, local architect or Baltimore architect or just architect, and they start to call people,
Yeah.
And I get the sense that most of the firms that they call aren't willing to have a true in-depth one-on-one conversation with them.
Right.
So part of my sort of sales pitch, is just to talk to any and everyone who calls.
Wow.
Even if they sound like they don't know what the heck they're doing, I can kind of tell they might not have any money. I still talk to them because you just never know.
Yeah.
I don't get people who just knock on the door. That doesn't happen. So it's a combination of word of mouth and online searches.
Okay. On another subject, I used to work in Baltimore. I worked for Zigger Sneed for a number of years. This was many, many years ago, 1996, 97, probably 97 time frame. And I worked for him for about 3.5 years. It was really great work, and I did residential work for their office. So it was a lot of fun. My wife eventually got a job in New York, and we moved. But I enjoyed, I've got some great stories from working with them. So, and I was a project manager, young project manager, first opportunity to run jobs. And man, I was awful. I mean, it was, it was a great experience. So
Steve,
do you know them?
Steve and Jamie are the owners of Zigger Sneed. I know them well.
Oh, you do? That's so great.
Zigger Sneed is the only firm in Baltimore that I've wanted to work for that I haven't worked for. I've interviewed there, I believe, 3 times.
Wow.
And it always came down to salary and the fact that I was a brash young guy who always thought I deserved more than anyone was willing to pay. And I was cocky enough to not be willing to negotiate and just kind of walk away.
Yeah.
And but Steve and I are somewhat in touch. I haven't talked to him in about a year, but I see him frequently because of the community here in Baltimore is so small.
Yes.
And he's always on the go. So they're a really good firm.
Yeah. Yeah. I worked mainly with Jamie. And it was funny when they hired me after about a year, Jamie and Stephen pulled me aside and he said, look, Doug, we're paying you too much money. We're not going to change your salary, but you completely oversold yourself. So I have a feeling I set the stage for you.
Probably. Oh, wow.
They're good guys.
Talk a little bit about Sam Mockbee, because I mean, obviously he's a very famous architect and teacher, but maybe some of our listeners don't know who he is and why he had the effect he had on you.
Wow. So Sam Mockbee, just on the fundamental level, he was an architect. On the sub level, he was a professor. So he had the typical balance that you get at a larger state run architecture school, a practitioner, academician, I guess the word is, or someone who focuses in academia. Beyond sort of the surface, he was just an interesting, quirky, very, very Southern. He was a weird dude. I mean, I've never met anyone as strange as he was.
Oh,
I mean, in the sense that he was an artist, and of course an architect. And his passion for art, I've seen him paint with barbecue sauce, mustard, anything that he could find. He would just, anywhere he would just break out a canvas, or if he didn't have a canvas, he would just use cardboard. And he just had the spirit of creativity that just couldn't be corralled at all. And because of who he was and how he communicated with people, no one ever stopped him from pursuing his vision, if that makes sense. So for me, I was one of the first, believe it or not, Black students at Auburn University. There had been maybe, I think, 5 or so that graduated prior to the mid-90s.
Wow.
So for me, I was inspired by this, I hate to use the term redneck, but that's what he would call himself. He called himself a redneck, like openly, and that made me uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable calling him Sambo. That was his nickname. Sambo is typically a derogatory term for Black people. That made me uncomfortable. But in the midst of me being uncomfortable, he just embraced pretty much any and everything. And I'm thinking in my mind, if this guy made it, I mean, he was a big guy. He had a big, like a Hall & Oates, like the country band, like he had one of those big beards. He didn't look like an architect. He looked like a guy who sold tractors or something. And he inspired me to realize that I can really do whatever I want as long as I treat people with respect. You can say what you want. You can eat what you want. You can do it how you want to do it. Just don't be a jerk. And that's really the way he ran his life. And you also have to have talent. He had an amazing wealth of talent. but he didn't have to brag about it. It was just evident. So one of the tidbits that I got from him as a student, I was a cocky student. Okay, I was out to to always compete, to prove to everyone that I belonged. I had a lot of fellow students, unfortunately, who had issues with those who weren't white and Southern. They even didn't like white people who were from New York. Okay, so they were Yankees. So I was on a mission to prove that I belonged. So I was a little. It came off as arrogance. Sam pulled me aside once and told me that, he basically said, kid, you have talent. You're not going to lose the talent. Stop being a jerk. Have a life, live your life, raise a family. And I remember clear as day, he said, you're never going to be anything as an architect until you're in your 50s. So he said, relax and enjoy the ride. And basically don't piss anybody off. And your talent is going to either, you're going to sink or swim by the talent. If you have it, you have it. If you don't, you don't. And he was letting me know that I had it. Don't abuse it, right? And exercise some patience. And I will never forget him taking the time and sharing that with me, because I could tell that he saw that I was struggling with being me, and I needed someone like him to really give me the assurance that I could do it in the profession and not listen to any outside forces and naysayers.
Wow. It's amazing that you had somebody like that in your life. I mean, somebody would take the time to talk to you. And one of the most important things is that I think to myself, I've got to be teachable. If I'm teachable and I can learn, then I can be better and I can change. And a teachable spirit is not something that, most of us are born with. So it's tough to listen to criticism. And that's what architecture school is all about. And to have somebody that cared enough to talk to you and to say what he thought, and then it was so meaningful. That's profound. Wow.
Well, and again, it wasn't that he said it, it was how he said it. Okay. I had other professors who would say the same thing, but it would come off like, you know what, you're a jerk, get out of my class. That's one way of doing it. The other way is to say, hey, kid, you think you're good, but you're not that good. That's another way. His way was different. And it wasn't just with me. This is how he was with everyone. That's why he was so successful. He knew how to take a situation and neutralize it and then make impact. One of the little known facts about Sam Mockbee, because I read all this stuff about him and I'm always, chuckling because I'm like, these people don't really know this guy. He was a weirdo. He knew magic tricks, right? So he would, I don't know where he learned magic tricks, but he would walk in a room and, inevitably there's a bunch of people, random people from the town of Greensboro, Alabama, like Forrest Gump. And he would just walk in, hey, everybody, how you doing? Want to see a magic trick? And everyone's like, sure, why not, right? and then he would do his little magic trick thing. And in doing the magic trick, executing the magic trick, he was making a connection, right? And once he made the connection with every individual in the room, he would then start to spread his message, like an architectural Jesus or something. Not comparing him to Jesus, but that's sort of the impact that he had on a sort of micro level with people. Even my mother, one time my mother called the home that we stayed in Greensboro. She couldn't find me or something. And I remember he's like talking to my mother. And my mother is an aggressive Black woman. She's like Oprah, right? And I remember hearing him say, hey, Mama McCray, hey, how you doing, sugar? He's buttering her up. And I'm like, this is phenomenal. This guy has neutralized my mom, right? He was like a lioness, and that's just how he was. And my mother loved Sambo. She just couldn't say enough about him. And I was always fascinated by his ability to connect with even someone like my mom. I love my mom. She's tough cookie.
Clearly.
Jerryn, it's so funny that you say that story because it reminds me of like me too. I think I was a sophomore or a junior, and one professor pulled me aside and said, "You're not as good as you think you are."
Mhm.
Awesome.
You're pretty good, but you're not as good as you think you are. So if you want to get anywhere, you better be quiet and start working. So it's the same conversation. It's like, you think you're such a hot shot. This is a really good architect. And he says, you're not as good. Not as good as you think you are. There's a lot of guys way better than you. And I kind of needed that. It was really good that someone just sort of slapped me down for a second and said, stop making noise, be quiet, and start working. And I thought that was really important. So I appreciate that story. It's great. Okay, so I don't know. Have we talked to have we started any of our topics, our 3 topics? I think we actually know a little bit about you from our first sort of a conversation here, but we want to make sure that we let you talk about some of the issues that you're thinking about these days as a practicing architect. What's kind of going on in your world?
Sure. So just to kind of summarize or just recap, not that anyone has my little list of topics, but we talked about patience. That was one of my topics. Did that. We talked about sort of diversity in clientele. I think we satisfied that. One of the things that I'm fascinated with is how we define ourselves as a profession and how people define us and how the two conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and a lot of that, I think, boils down to legislation and how really the law requires architects to exist in many situations. For example, in residential design in Baltimore City, it's not required for square footages. I think it's under 2,500 square feet or so. It's not required that one retains an architect. You can do it yourself, and you can purchase a row home and quote unquote draw the plans on a napkin, submit it to the city, and they can approve it if they feel that the information is sufficient. That reality creates a huge gap in architects' abilities to just generally practice and collect fees. So one of the things that I'm trying to learn to do is, with every conversation I have with a potential client or current client, make sure they understand the value of an architect, not necessarily from a financial standpoint, but from a qualitative standpoint, in listening to their ideas versus being able to provide them comparable or better solutions based on our expertise. Not that we're smarter or better, but anyone who's practiced anything for 10 years or 20 years should know how to provide different solutions. And that's difficult when you're competing against the media machine of like HGTV that makes it seem so easy to waltz into a house and point at a wall and say it's load bearing and rip it out, right? So I don't know. That's something that that was a really long summary of my little obsession there, but I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that? Or?
Well, what do you tell your clients that you can do for them that they can't necessarily do for themselves? If you sat down with somebody that wanted a row home renovation, what would you tell them?
So it's funny. I try not to tell them what I can do that they can't do, because that usually makes them feel insecure.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And because the reality is that I can do way more than they can do. I have clients who know SketchUp, but the reality is that they don't know it as well as I know it. Right. I understand, I can walk in a room and I can tell how far a wall is from another wall. They can't do that. They can't predict ceiling heights just by looking at a space. And they also don't understand how to source materials. They don't understand supply chain. But I've learned, and this has taken a lot for me to realize this, I can't rub it in their faces that I know more than they know.
Right.
Because it turns them off.
Mm-hmm.
Then I turn into the jackass architect to, the guy with the all black and, whatever stereotype that you can, drudge up for architects. I become that guy. And my success is sort of cornered in the reality that a lot of these people that hire me, they genuinely like me, and I genuinely like them. And if we like one another and respect the boundaries we're going to have a successful relationship. Now, there are some people who don't understand boundaries. Just like, I don't know if you watched the Dave Chappelle show, the Rick James skits. They said he was a habitual line stepper, right? There are some people who are never going to respect the fact that I'm a licensed professional. They're never going to respect the fact that, I had to study for really 6 years. It took me an extra year to get out of Auburn. I had to be an intern for several years. I had to pass and fail 9 exams, right, in order to have this document on my wall that says that I'm qualified. That doesn't mean anything to some people.
Right.
But I've learned to not take it personal because they probably do the same thing to their dentist, to their doctors, to their Uber driver. You're driving too fast. Why did you change lanes, right? So those people are just difficult people. But I still learn to work with most of them. If it doesn't work, then I just part ways with them early on. And in some cases, I give them their money back. And usually when you give someone their money back because they're difficult and they don't respect the boundaries, then they get it, right? And they'll actually call me back on occasion and say, I wasn't respecting the boundaries. Can we try this again?
Wow.
Because if not, they're just going to call some other guy and abuse
the
their
same
service,
thing.
right?
Yeah.
And again, I'm not suggesting that all people are like that. There are plenty of people who understand, but there occasionally are some who don't. And it's really up to me or up to us as architects to try to, I don't want to use the word train, but try to give them enough engagement so that they understand that an architect is not a tool for one's pleasure, right? We are not an extension of someone's imagination. We're licensed professionals, and we have liability insurance, most of us, which means that we have professional liability, which means that we can lose some or all if we make a mistake. So meaning if I listen to someone because their imagination says that, they need to hire me to execute their dream, which may or may not make sense, ultimately it's my responsibility as the architect. And there's delicate ways to explain that to people without being overbearing. And I think some of that goes to my, just going back to Sam Mockbee, he was really good at, being, I don't want to say diplomatic, it's not being diplomatic, it's just being honest, but not being a jerk. So
it's really interesting to me that so much of your work has to do with basically interacting with people, clients, people, and it's different than maybe other architects we talk to. It just how important that relationship is. I think people don't realize that an architect and a client, you're going to be together, let's say for a home project for, I don't know, 2-3 years maybe. I mean, you're together for a long time, and there has to be this respect back and forth, and you basically have to be on the same page, on the same team, pulling towards the same goals. And if it's not there, it sort of doesn't work. You really kind of have to feel like I like this guy, or I respect this guy, or we get along, we can talk to each other, and that's so important. If you don't have that, maybe it's not going to work. I don't know how it sounds like you feel that way. I mean, if there's not this mutual respect, it's just not going to be a good relationship. It's not going to happen. The project is not going to be as successful as it should be.
Yeah. So my goal in 2019, actually started in 2018, was to turn down projects, which I never ever did in the past. And when I look back at the jobs that I took, that in the initial meeting I knew that there were red flags. Those are the ones that I always sort of regret. And it's not the type of regret where I'm thinking that I'm going to get sued or go to jail. It's more just like financial regret or emotional regret, meaning that I spent too much time with someone who's ultimately never going to appreciate the product. So I've started turning down jobs, but not turning them down like, no, never call me again. What I do is I refer people to other guys, other architects that I think would be a better fit. Because that way, let's say 10 years from now, they say, oh yeah, I talked to that guy, Jerryn McCray. It didn't work out, but he helped me in some way, right? So if I just turn them down, they're going to be, oh yeah, I talked to that guy, Jerryn McCray. He was a jerk. So I have a short list of other firms in my mind that they're smaller or larger, that I think could probably work with some of these characters, if you will, because there are a lot of characters in Baltimore City. I'm not going to knock any other towns, but we have a lot of characters. So the characters call me, and I have to distribute the characters or collect the characters.
What about contractors? Do you end up working with the same contractors for jobs, or do you bid jobs out? I mean, how does that whole thing work in the majority of residential stuff that you do?
So because my training is typically, or not typically, primarily in the commercial sector, really large buildings, I've learned to detach myself from the whole bidding conversation. However, there are some jobs where I know that there's a certain contractor that's a good fit, and I will tend to steer a client toward that contractor. But I try my best not to become too buddy-buddy with another contractor, unless it's a design build project, or unless it's a negotiated contract where the contractor's already there from day one. There's one exception, my practice in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Their laws are different in the Virgin Islands. You can, they don't decouple between architects and contractors. You can be a licensed contractor and a licensed architect in the Virgin Islands. Now, I'm not a licensed contractor there, but I have a couple of really good friends who are general contractors there. We do tend to approach projects as a team.
Interesting.
So beyond that, I really try not to mix with contractors, mainly because if they underperform, it makes me look bad. And I'm really worried more about that. If they do well, great, that they're going to look good for all of us, but I really don't want them to underperform and damage my reputation.
Jerryn, I read on your website that you, among your characters, one of your clients is a professional football player. What is that like? I mean, I wonder about things like that, where someone is very young, but he's very well off. And this is maybe the people you're talking about, where you have to educate and figure out, I don't know, how to work with this person. What is that like when you're working with a professional athlete?
So it's interesting you brought that up, because I was not hoping that it didn't come up, but I'm like, I wonder if it's going to come up. So I recently have been working with a football player. He's retired now. He had to retire last year due to injury, but his name is Cam Chancellor. He's a safety for the Seattle Seahawks. I don't know if he's going to listen to the podcast. He might, but really good guy. And I met him through, he has a team of people that manage his affairs. They cold called me one day, and I remember the phone call vividly. I was walking down the street. I wasn't even in my office. And I didn't really take the call seriously, but like I said earlier, I talked to any and everyone. And they didn't tell me who they were representing. They just said, we have a guy. And I'm like, oh, sounds great. Sounds fantastic. Let's meet, whatever. So I met with his team. And after, I think, 2 meetings, they divulged, who we're dealing with. And it's not just him. They have other athletes that they represent. So the point I'm trying to make, or the point I'm getting to, is that when you're dealing with someone that you see on television that may or may not be your hero, or your kid's hero, you have to find a way to abandon admiration and still be a professional and help them make decisions independently without having stars in your eyes. And I really do look up to Cam, and I look up to him as an athlete and also as a human being. So at first it was very difficult to sit in a room with him alone. First of all, he's double my size.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm thinking, if I piss him off, if I run, he's going to catch me. But it was so I had to learn to get to know him as a person and not discuss sports. And that's sort of how the relationship initially grew. And to sort of conclude on the Cam Chancellor discussion, so he actually I designed 2 homes for him on the same lot. I helped him find the lot. The first home, I can't remember why we didn't go with that design. We made some changes. Then he decided, after some discussions with myself and his team, that he was not going to build either home, either design. he ended up buying a home in Seattle, and I'm actually happy that he did that because he ultimately got what he wanted. I still got to do what I do. He got to learn how to work with an architect. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but it kind of did. You know, in the midst of our 2 or 3 year contractual relationship, he gained a wife, right? I designed a house for his grandmother, a renovation. I got to know one of his nephews really well. I got to know a couple of his, I didn't get to know any of his teammates really well, but other guys from other teams that would always be around him, I got to know them really well. So ultimately, it was a win for me professionally. And I think Cam got what he wanted. And I don't think he would have gotten to the point of finding what he wanted unless I introduced him to the design realm. So that was really good. And I actually got to go to a lot of games too, which was cool.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was
what
awesome.
A cool relationship. That's amazing.
I'm sorry I'm giving you guys these long responses, but
No, I like them.
This is
It's great. It gives us some great insight into your work. I guess I want to just kind of, because we're nearing the end here, but I just want to go back to the number of row houses that you've designed. I mean, to me, that's a remarkable number. I mean, I've done a few, and I feel like I can tell people, yeah, I know that type pretty well, but 150. I mean, you must know them like inside and out. You look at a building, you must know what the issues are, what you can do with it, all the permutations of plan arrangements. I mean, that's where you have an expertise of a certain type. Yes, residential, and then even more specific, this specific type in this area, I know everything about this building inside and out. I mean, do you feel confident in saying something like that? I mean, you just know that.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. And I try not to make the row house design thing a specialty, but it is. The reality is that Baltimore is a town of row homes. Mm-hmm. So is DC to a degree. DC is sort of learning to expand beyond the lot width and depth. There's all types of tricks that people play in DC to get beyond that footprint. Philadelphia is a town of row homes. I don't practice in Philadelphia at all. I'm licensed in Pennsylvania, but no one wants to call me. Boo-hoo-hoo. Plug. If anyone's in Philadelphia and you're looking for an architect who knows row home design, I'm your guy. Baltimore is unique. So the reason why I've done so many is that, one, the permit requirements in Baltimore are not very strict. So it's very easy to go in, and I can knock out a row house design, a simple one, in a week. So in the spring and summer, I'll do between 10 and 20 every year. I know around now, it's right after the Super Bowl, the phones already started ringing for those type of projects. Yeah, by July, I would have probably done another 15. In some cases more. It just depends on the real estate market. So the lot widths in Baltimore typically, there's some 10-foot lots, there's 11-foot lots, 13-foot, 15-foot, then it jumps to 18 feet, I believe, and then there's 22-foot ones, I think. And there's some eyeballs in between. And the depths are as predictable as the widths. So if you've done like 20 of them, you just kind of know that certain things work, certain things don't. And it's very formulaic. And so when I walk into a home with a potential client or client, I never let them know that I know the answer. It's the same thing as earlier. I don't want them to think that I'm some arrogant, jerk. I'll probably use the word jerk 10 times in this interview here, but I don't want them to think that, even though I kind of am an arrogant jerk, but that's what I spend a lot of energy trying to hide that, right? So I just let them tell me what they want, what they need, while knowing the answer in my head, and then I reveal the answer when I think it's appropriate. And then also, you never know. I might be wrong. I may have been wrong the last 100 times I've seen this 13 by 50-foot box, right? You never know. So yeah, I've done a lot of them, and that's sort of why I've done so many, because it's kind of easy to get them reviewed and approved in the city. So, and I keep the fees low on those jobs because you got to remember, they're allowed to do them themselves, and I know that. So I can't go in and try to charge someone $20,000 for something that legally they could do themselves. So I found a sort of sweet spot in my fee structure to make it manageable for them to afford me. But I don't spend 3 months on these things. I just get them done. So it's profitable for me, and it's valuable for them.
Hey, Doug, any last questions from your side to our guest, Jerryn McCray?
No, I don't think so. This has been really informative. It sounds like you found a really great niche there, and at the same time, you're meeting guys like this football player, and ultimately, that can only be good for your business. You make connections, and eventually another guy calls you and he wants a big house, and when he builds it, you're doing site observation and it just gets bigger and bigger. So I know that's not necessarily the direction you want to head, but you're in a good spot there in Baltimore.
Well, I just want to be an architect. I tell people that all the time. People ask me, do you want to invest in this property with me? Do you want to design this website? Do you want to, not that, I guess I'm going to pick on millennials now. Millennial architects typically tend to try to do a lot of everything. And I've been very focused on just the one goal, which is to be an architect.
Yeah.
I knew when I was in about the 8th grade or so that this is what I wanted to do. And I focused in on that goal. And as an architect, a professional now, I'm 41 years old, I really don't want to do anything else. I'm not a developer. I'm not a graphic designer. I'm just an architect. And within that in itself, there's so many hats that, can be worn in a day. And that's enough for me. So,
yeah, that's very true.
Jerryn, why don't you give our guests contact information or websites or any other resources that you want to provide?
Sure. So just, basic contact. My website, I'll say it and then I'll spell it. It's Jerryn. I'm sorry. I was going to give you my email address. The website is jerryn4design.com. That's www.jerryn4design.com. The email address is, connects to the web address. It's jerryn4design.com. Most people drop the ball on the name spelling, and I don't care in conversation, but it matters when you're typing emails and on the web. So it's Jerryn. So it's Jerry with an N. It's pretty simple. I don't know the origin, but I've had a lot of fun with it, and I've passed it on to my oldest son, and he's having even more fun with it. So,
that's great.
Phone number, if anybody wants to write that down, is 443-889-5975. It's my cell phone. I field all the calls for my company, believe it or not. And I learned years ago from a wealthy client down in St. Thomas that they really don't want to talk to anyone but me. So I accept all the calls and have all the conversations, and I try to keep it light and fun because I love what I do. And again, I don't want to do anything else. So I'm trying to make sure that I don't end up in a situation where I have to do something else. So I try to make friends. And even though I've said earlier, I'm not always a nice person, but I love people. And I think because I love people, even when I'm, not the nicest, the fact that I'm genuinely in love with humanity carries the day. So.
That's great, Jerryn.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jerryn. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks very much, Jerryn. This has been great.
Sure, I appreciate it. Thank you all for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
You've been listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. If you have any questions or want to give us any feedback on the show, feel free to reach us through our website at thedougandsteveshow.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.